joining us.
I got all the technical reports from the technical committee. I'm sure that was a light.
Got to get my act together.
That was the shortest meeting they've had yet. We were done at 3:30. Yeah. Well,
Good stuff too.
it's good stuff, but there's not much to review because the plan is still out there.
Yeah.
If we had sections of the plan to review, it would have been longer, I'm sure. You don't have much to talk about.
Now 6 p.m. We'd like to begin. If we can get all our board committee seated, please.
Progress report.
Want my pin though.
Okay. All right. I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Call this meeting to order. Face the flag. Hand over your heart. Please follow after me, saluting our republic and the flag which represents it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to ask everybody to remain standing in honor of a couple things. I would note that today is a very important day in our history. 77 years ago today was the final day of the Battle of Midway, which turned the tide in the Pacific. It started the tide turning in the Pacific, and 75 years ago today we started D-Day and the tide of invading occupied France and defeating the Axis on that side of the world. I also learned just a couple hours ago that our city manager's father was involved in a severe fire in Washington earlier this week, and he succumbed to those injuries this afternoon. So I'd offer a moment of silence praying for those who have died in honor of our country, their families, and Ron's father and Ron's family. Thank you very much. We on back there, Gary? Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, let's begin with open public comment. That's for any a comment from the public on something that is not on the agenda. You will be allowed to comment on the agenda, on any agenda item when that item comes up. So do we have any interested members of the public tonight? Take advantage of open comment. Nothing seen. We'll go right to number 3, and this may take a little bit of time. We got some minutes to review, but we finally got all caught up. So let's begin with the first item under number 3 is the February minutes. We've had these a couple times. We've had them a couple times, and now we received no updates since the last meeting where they were provided at the meeting itself. So do we have more discussion, or I'll entertain a motion of approval?
You want to do a roll call?
I'm sorry, you're right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am under the weather and medicated today, so keep me honest.
Okay. Am I on here?
We hot?
Tim? Ed? Renee,
Here.
Judy, David,
Here.
Pat,
Here.
Joshua, here, West,
I'm here.
Lyle.
I'm here.
So we've got James, Raj, and John Kersey.
Yeah, John, I had previous information that neither John nor Nick would be here. They're out of town this week.
Don Steba,
Here.
and Lorelei Oviatt.
Here.
And we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Given
Question, Ryan Klausch, is he still on the committee? He's BLM?
they're supposedly appointing a new one, he hasn't been appointed by the GA yet, so we have a vacancy that they're in process of nominating to the GA itself. And the second part of the announcement on that is we had a clarification of the policy that came up a year ago under discussion of both the PAC and the TAC about alternate memberships when a member could not be here. And the determination originally had been no, then it became no for the TAC and yes for the PAC with the proviso that the alternate be designated in writing, either paper or hard copy or email, but they were not able to vote. They could speak but not vote and represent you. Clarification came about through something that happened at the TAC, and we are back to the situation where it's primary members only, either present or voting, or talking even. So no more alternates. We've only used that a very few times. Most folks have been here and been pretty diligent about it. So wanted to update everybody on that. With that, let's go to back to our item 3A, approving the February minutes. And I think we had, do we have a motion? Okay, Judy moved. Pat seconded. Any discussion? Do you want to do roll call or you want to do hands or aye? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All
I have
opposed?
to abstain. I wasn't here. I have
You
to
weren't,
abstain.
okay,
I
so
wasn't-
no, one abstention.
Yeah.
Any noes? Any abstentions other than Lyle? Any recusals? Didn't expect that. Okay, with that, let's go to March minutes. We've also had these for now a couple months to look at in final form for a month without any submitted change. So I'll entertain a motion on these.
So move.
Lyle?
I'll second.
Wes seconded. Any discussion? None heard. I'll ask for all in favor of approving the March minutes. Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Recusals? Okay. Got that recorded, Josh? Okay. With that, we'll go to our change in format that marked the beginning of the videotape version of these meetings on a permanent basis. That's the Thursday minutes, and we had these last time. We made some recommendations as to how we approach them. Josh has taken over this role, and since they are now recorded, they are noting points at the reference video that is available on the GA site and also on the city site, and access to it in order to follow these so folks can reference the exact words rather than try to do a court transcript of what transpired in here, since folks have different interpretations sometimes. So any discussion, or do we have a motion?
I have 3 corrections for the April.
Okay, you have corrections for
Yeah.
April? You ready to copy, Josh?
Yep.
Okay, one is under number 8, shallow well mitigation policy. I wanted it added that the chairperson, David Janis, appointed the following PAC members to the ad hoc committee on shallow well mitigation policy. And it's Judy Decker, Pat Quist. It mentioned in the minutes that there was an ad hoc, but it didn't specify. Only the chairman can appoint. Members can't just, by consensus, agree to create an ad hoc committee. That's why I wanted that in the minutes. It's my first correction.
I think that's important. Thank you.
It's part of parliamentary
It's,
procedure.
yeah, and those are the things that, although we're streamlining the minutes a bit with this method, we still have to capture the parliamentary procedure.
Okay, then my second one is under agenda item number 10, future agenda items, where it's I ask that it please list after as well as imported water update, add shallow well impact ad hoc committee update, because the chair has appointed several different ad hoc committees. I wanted to make sure people understood that it was the shallow well impact ad hoc committee.
I think that's a good change.
Okay.
Any others, Renee?
My third one has to do with the memorandum given to us by James Worth, Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority Legal Counsel. He wrote a memo to us about public comments by committee members, and I wrote, I would like to have that put in the minutes, and I would like also some kind of statement. This is a statement I would like added to that, is the chairperson then summarized that this means that the PAC members can speak publicly, but they can only represent themselves as individuals, not as a member of or speaking on behalf of the PAC. And I think that should be in the minutes to remind all the members.
And you want the attachment to be Jim Worth's letter, which we requested this of him, and he provided it to us, and it was in line with what we thought was appropriate.
Yeah.
So everybody agree? Okay.
If you want to put his memorandum in the minute, I don't know.
Well, I think it's worth attaching.
Okay, if you want it in. I wasn't really specifying that. I just want to make note that he did give us a memorandum, and you summarized what it meant, that we're not supposed to be commenting individually. I mean,
or at least clarify
as
your
PAC members.
Yeah, clarify it when you identify yourself.
Yeah, that we can speak publicly, but we must clarify that we are speaking on our own behalf, not representing any.
Yeah, you're not representing the PAC. You can represent
PAC.
yourself or the entity that you represent on the PAC by your appointment.
Right.
I believe that the document should be as a part of the minutes for future reference for future PAC members, and I would vote to approve the minutes as corrected.
Was that a motion?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, Pat seconded. Are there any other proposed amendments to the motion? To the motion. To the minutes. Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote on approval of the minutes as amended.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Recusals? Hearing none, it was unanimous. Okay, with that, let's go to Thursday. Congratulations on your first minutes, Josh.
Thanks. I like that. I second that emotion. I think that's from a song, right, David?
Yeah, don't get me going. I'm not in any kind of shape to sing. Not that I ever am. Okay, the final item under this agenda, item number 3, is last month's meeting, the May 2nd meeting. You have in front of you, and Josh followed the same format that we agreed to. So it's the May minutes. Do we have any proposed amendments? If hearing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the May 2nd amendment. The May 2nd minutes.
I'm contagious. Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Pat seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving the May minutes as presented? Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention?
Yes. Abstention. I wasn't
While
here.
you weren't here,
I wasn't here.
and that's appropriate.
Okay.
Any recusals? Okay, thank you. With that, we're on to item number 4, draft GSP update and review. And I sent out notice to the PAC members yesterday when I got the clarification as to where we stood on this, and I received the full update from Stetson, the water resource manager, today at the TAC meeting. By the way, we did have 7 members of the PAC at the TAC meeting today, So a couple of the following agenda items that will be appropriate for discussion, those that were there. But on the draft GSP, we were to have Chapter 3 this week to review, and it will not be ready until next Friday. Chapter 2 is expected to follow it by 1 week. And the reason for the delay has been reworking or reassigning the manpower within Stetson to cover two things. One was the back-to-back-to-back 3 scenarios, modeling scenarios that are going to be discussed shortly, and the outcome of those that took roughly 10 days apiece. So for the last 30 days, they've assigned additional people to work on those modeling scenarios and the associated shallow water impact and water quality total dissolved solid studies that were a part of it. The second thing they had to reassign folks to was there's a cash flow issue with regards to getting the state to respond to its Prop 1 grant submissions, and they asked for an additional assembly of 2 quarters reports into 1 quarter on top of the one they had submitted, which required a quick reassignment of assets in order to get that report back to the state DWR so that they can, in fact, they promised the check to be cut as soon as they get it and review it in a timely fashion, which will help the cash flow issue that the Groundwater Authority has. So they prioritized those 2 over Chapter 2 and 3 and slid them by a week. But Jeff Helsley, who is responsible for Chapter 3, personally promised next Friday. We're going to hold him to that for Chapter 3 and immediately followed by Chapter 2. Now, after that, it is all pending on direction specifically from the Groundwater Authority that is expected to come out of the meeting in 2 weeks with regards to where they go following the results of those 3 scenarios that we're going to talk about shortly. And some other considerations because the next chapters of the GSP are in fact dependent on that. And that will, once they have that direction, they will redo the POA&M, and having redone the POAM, we'll have a schedule for when the next chapter deliveries will come. And yes, we are in a crunch, and they acknowledge that as well. And that is part of the discussion that the GA has to have, and I expect to have some of that discussion will be visible at the next GA meeting in the 20th, I think it is. So that's the update. Are there any comments from the committee members on the update? Any public comment on this item, number 4? And I missed public comment on number 3, so if there's any on that, I'll open that also. Seeing none, we'll move to number 5. And this is the progress on the model management scenario modeling that was done. And go ahead, Gary. Oh, I need this clicker. The first few pages of this are the summary of what was presented at the last PAC and TAC meetings 1 month ago on the Thursday. And they are the summary of the 3 newest scenarios that were then in the process of being run back-to-back, roughly 10 days each. And they were the 3rd, 4th, and 5th scenarios that have been run on the model for comparison after the baseline. And those scenarios were the white paper scenario, the water buyout, which was humorously called Water for Peace, and the immediate halt to pumping, which was also humorously called the nuclear option, for those that are drawing connections to what some of the colloquial discussion has been. I'm going to briefly go over those because those were gone over last month, and then get to the new information, which is the model results, some of the hydrographs, the change in storage, the shallow well impacts, and the preliminary mitigation costs, and then the TDS transport, the water quality piece of it that I talked to. I am not the one that conducted the models. I heard about an hour presentation on it today together with 6 of the other members up here, so we can entertain a few questions, but we're not the folks that can answer the technical questions on this. It is just for our awareness of what was presented in closed session to the Groundwater Authority members last week, and that's when they saw this. And I'll make a comment, an important comment on that after this. Okay, this is scenario 3. It's the white paper. The white paper was, I think, created about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and it was one that was agreed upon by a number of folks and presented at the time. It was presented in the TAC and the PAC, and it was thought, let's get a look at some of the options that are in this and what the outcome is from an effects piece of it. And the items on here, I'm not going to go through them in detail unless someone has a question, and I still won't be able to go through them in detail as to what they are. But one of the important things to note is that it took the annual pumping down to what is understood, currently known, and agreed upon to be the safe yield, 7,650 acre-feet per year. That is lower than what you're going to see in model scenarios number 4 and 5. It also did include the potential for direct use of imported and recycled water if there were demands in excess of that, but obviously because they baselined it at that, there were none, to my understanding. So this is what it looked like. This is not the results. This is just what it was presented to be. This is the input to the model, essentially, although the actual input is much more complex than this. This depicts it. This is the allocations. I'm sorry, it is specifically not the allocations. These were the numbers that were used to assign to pumping in areas to measure the effects of what was outlined in the previous information. The specifics of this there's much more detail on that, but it is not allocations and was specifically noted as such today. Scenario number 4, water buyout, Peace for Water, whichever you want to call it. This one does a more rapid ramp down. It does assume recycled water is available and uses it, as well as the potential for imported water. And you'll note their second to the last bullet is that it settles the pumping, annual pumping at 12,000 acre-foot above the 7,650 current safe yield, with the assumption that what's made up in between is supplemental sources. That's what this is depicted by, and you see how much more rapid the drop-off is in terms of the pump reduction in pumping, with the perhaps intended benefit being safe maintenance of the water storage in the valley, and potentially an impact, therefore, also to the water quality by not drawing down as much. That's one of the implications that needs to be shown in the modeling. It has the specifics on the right-hand side there. Here's a little bit more in the same format of how it's not an allocation, but it is for the model purposes, the assignment under the guidelines of the scenario itself to the various pumpers. And the footnotes are very important. There's 8 of them on each to understand what's actually in the model. Scenario 5, immediate halt to pumping, nuclear option, same issue. This one is a even more sudden ramp down, but note it goes to the middle between those other two, between the 7,650, which is the minimum safe yield as currently understood, and the 12,000 that was in scenario number 4. This goes to 10,000 acre-foot per year. But also note that, once again, supplemental water is assumed to be making up that difference. Don, if I say something wrong, let me know. So that's what it looks like graphically. The blue line, so everybody knows, is the baseline. The baseline was the predicted pumping from all the pumpers. It wasn't the current yield, it was the predicted. Currently, what they're pumping is where that first knee in the curve, in the orange curve, occurs there about 2,800 or so. That's not the exact number, but that's what the last current data was. And that's why you see on each one of these graphs there was a bump at that point. Hopefully the meds keep working and I don't cough much. That's what that looks like graphically. You'll see obviously right away why it's called the nuclear option, or the immediate halt to pumping. Now to the important part. Water level, the model results, and these are just summary. And again, I'm not the modeler. I'm not DRI, Desert Research Institute, and I'm not Stetson Engineers, who are the water resource managers who presented parts of this. Water level change, hydrographs, we'll talk about each one of those. There's the water level change and its depiction. Note the legend, rising, neutral, falling. This is scenario number 3. On the lower right side, you'll see what it is. It's the white paper scenario. And the black numbers inside will show you the feet. That's the units for the water level change over 50 years in the valley. And there really isn't any blue in terms of the lines which depict the gradient. Here's, did I skip one? Oh, it had 2 of them. I'm sorry. I focused on the lower right. Obviously, scenario 4 and scenario 5 are both on this chart, and you get a better idea of the comparison looking from one to the other. And I'll leave this up for a moment because I realize we did not have handouts in the audience. The PAC received this last night, I think, or yesterday afternoon. You'll note even though there is replenishment and maintenance of a inflow, a safe yield overall, that we still see south east and northwest areas of falling, but we do see rising in the west in particular. And the numbers overall draw your attention to the 10s and 20s, not 40s, et cetera, that you looked at on the previous one. Now keep in mind, this is just looking at the levels. There's other items are going to be looked at. So that's the water levels. Here's the change, and I certainly cannot explain this in detail. It is available on our website now. It's posted. It's on our website. It's on the GA website. This presentation and a more detailed DRI presentation are available on the GA website. This presentation is available under the PAC meeting tonight handout, and the DRI handout is available under the TAC handouts. So if you go to the GA website, you can look at the levels of detail below this and more extensive notes. There is a summary, verbal and graphical coming up. That's what it looks like for the water buyout, Water for Peace. A little bit better. There's the additional look at the immediate halt or nuclear option. And again, the color coding is the darker, the cooler, the lower drawdown, and in fact, potential increase. So you can get an idea of what's happening overall to the water level in the basin overall and by area, because it is different in different areas, and part of that's due to where the ramp downs occurred the most, which in many cases, in particular the final one here, the ramp downs, where the ramp downs were immediately zeroed, were in the area where you see the most blue. Here's a different look at it. I think that's a hydrograph, what you call a hydrograph on the left, correct, Don? You want to help with this? You know, you're able to talk to this better than I am. You don't want to get in trouble. Okay, again, the warm colors are obviously more negative impact on the basin water level overall. As you get to the cooler colors, green, blue, etc., you're looking at less impact and, in fact, rising if you look at the center legend bar. There's the water buyout, which again stopped at 12,000, but had an increase, a sooner ramp down than the white paper did. You see more and darker cool colors. You still see the southeast and northwest impact.
It's not just the south. It's not just the southeast. It's the southwest also.
There's some in the southwest. Yeah, it depends on how you define southwest. You down further to the southwest is what I would call the southwest. But yeah, in the center south, I would agree. Here is the immediate halt, the nuclear option. So it's mitigated some of that. It's deepened the blues, but you would expect some of that because that's where you did the most pumping reduction. Also, it's where the highest use is, there in the west, center west. There's another look at the overall accumulation of change in storage overall, and you want to look at that baseline, which again was the predicted pumping that had a GSA named the IWV Groundwater Authority not been formed by the 5 entities in the valley and begun the process of looking at this. That's where we would be headed and looking at modeling management actions that could try to get us into balance. And what you see is something approaching balance about at the 50-year mark with an impact of storage, loss of storage overall at the level shown on the left-hand side. What this doesn't address is the quality of the water, depending on how much loss and in what particular area also. It doesn't address some other specific issues that we get into shallow well impacts, quality of water, et cetera. And it certainly doesn't address it on a local area basis. This is overall change in storage in the entire basin, which has different sub-pockets. There's the notational or graphical, I'm thinking in terms of Excel spreadsheet summary of it. Look at it a different way if you want to see what the impacts are. And again, these are available on the website. Now here is the shallow well impact piece of this, and Gene Moreau from Stetson summarized this today. And this sheet is the historical. This is what's already happened. This is what the data have that they show. There are roughly 980 or so shallow wells in the valley that we know of. We have data on, and I'm using the we as the Groundwater Authority. We have roughly 872 of those that are known, and we have the data on them. Historically, going back to 1980 and prior to that. But in this case, beginning in 1984, there have been 91 wells that have met the criteria for wells impacted negatively, either loss of quality to a level of unusability or loss of water, period, and that, as I understand it. So that's 91 wells to date, and this will come up later when we talk about the shallow well mitigation plan. So this is the baseline. Again, this is if we did nothing and everybody in the valley pumped as they predicted that they would when surveyed earlier this year. This is what it would look like through the 50-year timeline starting in 2020 out to 2070. And you see 836 totally impacted. And that's because based on the data we have as to what is in the basin, what is the reserve, and what's being used in the model today, it essentially becomes unusable in 50 years under that unrestricted current planned use baseline. This is scenario 3, the white paper. And you look at beyond the 91 that have already been impacted, 73 additional ones are impacted, and because of some of the pumping and cone of depression that surrounds them, you see most of the impact is done and leveled off, as you saw where the aquifer leveled off in the total water level chart. Overall, it levels off around 2050, and you don't see anything really after 2041, with the exception of the one on the very far right that was explained today from additional pumping and cone of depression around that well and those associated around it. It becomes unusable in 2070, but that's a total of 73 wells under scenario 3. So you're looking at the impact of the aquifer in a different way. Here's number 4, the water buyout. Ramp down, and you see 36 are impacted. You see, although there's a rough balance achieved around 2050 in the previous water level charts, based on the cone of depression hydrogeology features, there are still 4 more that become unusable at some point beyond that, but we get to a total of 36. So 72 in the previous model run scenario, 36 in this one. Then we get to scenario 5, the immediate halt to pumping, and you see the almost as soon as the immediate effects of the pumping are felt within 6 years. That's where the primary effects are, and then there are 2 additional wells out 25 years and 35 years later, roughly, or so, and that's 15. So each one of those is a halving of the impact to shallow wells under this model. There's the spreadsheet version, and it puts mitigation costs, which we mentioned was going to be one of the things we looked at to it. The mitigation costs to those folks who lose their wells because of the impacts of this. So I'll let you digest that for just a moment. Now, this is their look at total dissolved solids. They have the money in the grant to perform 2 complete model analyses, scenarios, to model total dissolved solids. One of them was done early on, and I don't remember what that was for, Don, but they chose to look at one of these 3 alternatives as the second one, thinking each one of them gets it into a balance that maintains a reasonable level in the aquifer. And so let's look at the worst case one and see where that puts us. And the scenario 3 was the worst case in terms of the maximum drawdown to the aquifer before it achieves rough balance. And so they wanted to look at the impact to solids, and the discussion today and previously had been that 500 parts per million is about the point where you become able to taste the sodium, the salt in the water, depending on, some folks have more sensitive tongues than others. Somewhere in the 750 to 1,000, you can't take it, and that's depending on some other factors as well, and perhaps unhealthy. So judging it, they took 500 as a line to look at. How many wells are impacted each 10-year or each period, first 10, second 10, and then the full 50? How many wells have that total dissolved solid increase, and we get up to 350 overall.
I have a comment.
Yes, Judy.
I remember from my days on the Water District Board, and Mr. Zadiba, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that 500 parts per million total dissolved solids and less are the primary drinking water standards. 500 to 1,000 are secondary drinking water standards. Anything above 1,000 has to be treated. Is that still correct?
Yes, that's correct. And also, if I recall correctly, this is a different topic, but there's funding to run 2 TDS scenarios. I don't think this is the first one.
Oh, it is.
I think they're reserving the second one for what they decide would be potentially the final model.
Okay, I misunderstood, because what I thought they said was if they wanted to run another one, they were going to have to decide. They were looking for the money to do that, I thought was what Steve said. But you've been closer to it than I was.
I could be wrong, but I'm thinking this is the first one. I don't
Okay.
recall seeing another one.
Anybody else who was at the meeting remember with more clarity?
Yes, I believe Don is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we can go back to this for reference. At this point, I'd like to open it up for discussion. Before we start the discussion, I will clarify. I asked the question, was there a decision coming out of the meeting to run another model, and is another model being run at this current time? And the answer was no. And that's part of what they're going to get towards arriving at, hopefully at the Groundwater Authority meeting in 2 weeks from today. So with that, questions from the panel?
I had quite a few comments.
Okay.
If that's okay.
I have some comments too.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's start with Josh and go to Judy.
First of all, I want to say that they're calling it the white paper approach. I think Jean Moran said it correctly. It's a modified white paper approach that was not endorsed, consulted with, or suggested by Mojave Pistachio, so I want to get that on the record. Also, the key difference between the way the Water for Peace and nuclear option were run compared to the way the modified white paper was run was the artificial recharge. The 2 other options had 168,000 for one of them and 999,000 acre-feet of additional artificial recharge that was spread, and that's where you see the maps that have the big blue areas of rising recharge compared to the big red map that they generated for the white paper. It's 100,000 acre-feet of recharge will have a significant impact. So that's one thing. There's only about, and that's okay, so assuming that you accept all of the issues with the 3 model runs, there's only about 5 feet of drawdown of difference between some of the model runs. And so if you look at the amount of recharge that would be needed to make up for that, it's about 2,600 acre-feet per year over the model run period. So another way to look at this is there's 2 paths. One path is what the actual water resource manager is calling the nuclear option, which is being called that because it's going to generate dispute and challenges and conflict. That one is basically 2,600 acre-feet difference than the best option that they're proposing. Do you see what I'm saying? Is that there's the difference between the peaceful one and the nuclear one is not that much difference. And so I think that there's kind of a false premise that's being presented by the way these models were run, that they didn't really that the difference is so slight that I think that it should be a future policy consideration. How much harm to the community versus how much can be augmented by just bringing in a tiny bit more imported water. So I think that that's just one of the things that needs to be looked at. Also, when it comes to the shallow wells, the 99 wells beforehand, I think Jean Moran said today that they've actually collected only 3 reports to verify the 90-something that they've run in the model. So, one of the things about backwards and forward dating, I think, is I probably got those terms wrong, but backwards and forward validating a model is you'd like to be able to run the model, look back, and find that number of impacted wells, and they haven't. So some of the questions are, have they collected actual reports for specific domestic wells that have been impacted, when, where, and how? Have they got a detailed map showing the location of the 91 domestic wells that were supposedly impacted between 1980 and 2019? Have they validated those? We heard from Jean Moran, it's 3. So I'm just saying that
That was three that were not, as I understood, it was three that they didn't verify that they weren't re-drilled. Three that they knew were re-drilled, correct? Lyle being one of them.
yeah.
So
I
those
think-
were three where they actually know for sure that they drilled a new well where the first one went dry, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard her saying that they had not gone and that they had not validated the 91
Josh,
wells that had gone bad.
you're speaking very rapidly, and I'm presuming you have this on your computer. And I would appreciate it if I could have a copy of it, either via email or paper or whatever.
It's just my personal notes that I
I
typed to
don't care.
myself, so they're in
Yeah.
the record,
Okay.
and
I
that's all I had.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And that your points are addressing the one issue of the total drawdown.
Well, I guess I had one last thing I'd written down here. So we are now a couple months out from having to have the 90-day review period in order to get this submitted on time. So basically, our input is now done because they're so short on time. Stetson even said today that they may have to go to DWR and request a delay.
I think they're probably going to.
So
They're going
I
to
just
have to.
So if I could finish real quick, Judy. So I'm just saying that I feel like the next model run they're going to make is going to be a decision made in closed session, and we will get to review it after it's been run. So that's my last comment. Thank you.
Yeah, your last one is an assumption. It may get announced and discussed publicly too. We don't know for
It's
sure.
just a prediction of future events
Okay,
based off of past
that's
events.
my point.
I
That's my
think,
point.
I think Josh's last comment was very valid.
It could be, but we don't know.
Well, thus far, apparently the really important decisions have been made by the GA board in closed session and the discussion thereof. I have some comments on the model myself. If you look at the scenarios that you presented to us, David, always the southern part of the basin does not have very much positive effect from any of the scenarios. That they're all focused on the northwest, and we have this great big blue bubble on the northwest. And one has to ask, there are a lot of shallow domestic wells, shallow small ag wells in the south, in the southwest. Why isn't there a greater improvement in the groundwater level rising in that area? And I think the answer might be because the Indian Wells Valley Water District has most of its pumping in that area. We don't have any scenarios shown whereby pumping, whether it's from the Navy or the Water District or Big Ag, is somehow evened out. For instance, there's no scenario if we get, pick a number, I'll say 10,000 acre feet of imported water, everybody continues the same, but the water district uses that 10,000 acre feet of water. What would happen to a scenario like that? You still have, in all of the scenarios, the wells that, when I look at a map, I immediately look for a marker for a street that I know. And you have the wells that are south of Drummond. There aren't too many north of Drummond anymore. I think most of those people are on Water District water. But if you go west of Jack's Ranch Road, past the Acus, and you go south of Drummond, or even Ward, there are a lot of shallow wells out there. They all stay yellow. Yellow is the palest color they get. And I think that's something that somehow needs to be folded into. How do we even out the water in the basin?
Yeah, I think the valid points have been made from both of your comments. You know, Josh, you're focusing on overall water levels and the impact of, as I pointed out, not taking into account the extra water, which you categorized as 168 or whatever it was, and about 100 was 98 or whatever in that neighborhood, that brought it to a much closer overall equality if you in fact took scenario 3 and put the supplemental water in that. What Judy's pointing out is also another thing that didn't show, and I don't remember from scenarios 1 and 2 if they did show pumping in different areas and the impact of that, because what you see is the total reduction, as I mentioned, in the Brown Road area. That's where the biggest reduction is, and you see the continued pumping that remains, as Judy's pointing out, is affecting those areas. And so what if that was done in a different fashion? Let's say the city were to do its pumping there for some reason in the other location. What would it be in the valley? And I think that's what Judy's pointed out is,
Well,
overall we don't have a place, something that looks at the different parts of the valley and changing the pumping scenarios.
you know, we pump what, 28,000, 29,000, call it 30,000 acre feet in round numbers. About a third of that is the water district, if I recall, more or less. There's some small number for, there's 2,000 and some for the Navy, 2,000 and some for Sales Valley, 1,000 for the de minimis users. And then they say the rest is agriculture. Well, so they've made these models based on dealing with agriculture, which is the big agriculture is focused on North Brown Road, and that's where it is. That's okay. You can't change that. That's where it is. But they're focusing on getting rid of that big agriculture. I say there needs to be a little more finessing done, not necessarily with the model, but with data of the future. And the GA board is so far behind at this point, for whatever reason. I don't think they have the time before they write the GSP to do this. And I think it's a real issue for everyone.
Other comments? Lorelei.
I just want to make sure I understand Josh, because I thought I had written it down, but now all this talk, I'm not sure. Were you talking about the difference between the amount of imported water that would have to come in 2035, or was I misunderstanding what you were saying?
Just because of the way they ran the white paper scenario, it was ramped down to 7,650 instead of 10,000, and all the other ones were ramped down to just 10,000 by like 2035 or 2040. So from the 2040 to 2070 period that they run the models from, all those other ones are importing 3,000 whatever acre feet per year across that whole time period. And so whenever they show the reduction in the drawdown in the total amount of storage and all that, if you were to say that instead of reducing this down to, if we reduce it to some different amount and we imported that much water, it's not a one-for-one, because there's a lot of details is all that imported water spread? Is it used directly? I think there's a lot of other things that change. But I think my point is that this white paper scenario is not what we actually modeled in the actual white paper. I think it's a simplified version, which I understand they have to do that because of the way their model's configured. But I think one of the questions was, is this an apples and apples comparison or an apples and oranges comparison? Because two of them have 100,000 acre feet of imported water, and the third model doesn't have any imported water.
Okay, so let me ask you a different question then. Between scenario 4 and 5, this paper that was given out at the TAC, that's all I'm basing this on, says that in 2035 there would have to be 4,350 acre feet a year of imported water. And for scenario 5, which is the immediate halt, there would be 2,370 acre feet. Are you saying that those numbers are not 1,980 acre feet different? Are you saying that there's some other smoothing that they're really not different.
Which chart are you looking at on the TAC brief? And you said
Page 5 and 6
Of the
of the
TAC brief.
handout of the TAC brief, which is all I know about the modeling.
right.
So I just want to get your numbers and understand. The numbers say on this PowerPoint that in 2035 in scenario 4, there will be 4,350 acre-feet per year of imported water recharge. Yet on scenario 5, they only have to import 2,370 acre-feet. And the only reason this is important to me as a land use planner is I am the one that provided the number of parcels so that we could mail out that flyer. There's only 19,407 privately owned parcels in this entire valley. Those are the people who will have to pay for imported water. Now, the difference between these two, if it costs, there are people who say, oh, it only costs us a couple $1,000s an acre foot. I don't believe that. By the time the infrastructure, but let's say it's 3,000 acre feet. You're talking a difference of $6 million. And there won't be 19,000 parcels who can pay because a lot of those parcels won't be irrigated. There'll be diminished pumpers. There's a lot of things. So I think the numbers, so I'm just trying to get clear.
Yeah, well, I think in response to what you're saying,
Yeah.
I think that if there was a rerun of the models, I think it'd be requesting on the nuclear option and the water for
Okay,
peace
I would
one
really-
to not run those
to
down
my-
to 10,000, to run them to 7650.
76,000. Okay, that's fine.
And then if they ran those comparably, my assumption would be that the water for peace and the nuclear option would look very much like the white paper model, the way they've ran it.
At 7,000.
At 7,650. So,
Okay.
so what I'm
understand
saying
your
is that
comment.
if you were to, okay.
I
that's it.
understand your comment. You're saying that they did 10,000 acre feet on 4 and 5.
Right.
They
Instead
did
of
10 and then
so
12.
if you were to have run
And
them
they
down
did
to,
on the modified white paper, which is option 3.
They ran it
did
down to 7650.
7650.
so they never import
Got
water.
it. If I may ask, Chair, Don, do you know why they did that? Does anybody know why they did that?
Closed session.
Well, no. I think, is there some technical reason they would do that? Don't know. Okay.
No, in scenario
Thanks.
4, just to clarify, scenario 4 was 12,000. Scenario 5 was 10,000. Scenario 3 was 7,650.
And where are you getting those statistics from?
Off the charts I just presented,
Can you go back and show me those charts to show me that
Gary,
recharge?
can you put it up again,
Can you
please?
show me those recharges?
Yeah.
Just so I can keep track here. Thanks, Josh.
Why? Okay. Whoops. There's scenario 4, second to the bottom. Total annual pumping. And the difference.
Okay, the total annual pumping and the recharge are two different things.
Right.
Josh was saying originally that it was the recharge number, not the
The
total annual
recharge is the
pumping.
balance between the two.
No, the
As I
recharge
understood.
is what falls from the
Yeah.
sky and what we have. That is different from total
You're
annual
correct.
pumping. So
You're
you
correct.
can't use 12,000 acre feet on that chart as comparable to
I agree.
the recharge in
I
this
misread
valley
you.
is 75. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
The difference will be made up in imported water, I believe.
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to be.
That's what
I'll
I
go
was
back.
understanding.
I'll go back and look at all the numbers, but I just wanted. There's a lot of numbers flying around, so I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
I got Josh's comment, and I'll go back and look to see. I'm interested in what the recharge number is, not what the pumping number is, because obviously in those 3 options, there's different levels of pumping depending on the decisions they make about land use. That was how they came to those.
And different
in-
levels of imported to get to the balance.
Absolutely.
To get to the balance. That's why they're related.
course, of
And that's why I was
So in
pointing
the
out 12 and
context
10.
of scenarios 4 and 5, recharge is imported water being recharged to the basin, not rainfall precipitation.
That's what I understood.
Yeah.
That's the recharge. Is it
Yeah.
supplemental water?
Whereas in the white paper
I
one,
understand
and you-
that.
okay.
But they had in the model a baseline of how much water. I'm clear about this part. They had a baseline of how much water was going to not have to be bought and brought in, because the model always starts with that.
Yes.
My understanding, it was the 7,600 acre feet.
Yes.
Okay, that's the number that we all start with
That's
in the
the
model.
natural recharge, right?
That's the natural recharge. And then they start changing the variables. Josh is saying that they changed the natural recharge. That's exactly what you said a minute ago. I just want to be clear. They did not change the natural recharge. They changed the assumptions about how much pumping and then who was going to pump. I don't think they changed the natural recharge. Don?
No, I don't think you
No.
meant that they changed the natural recharge.
No,
They
is it-
added to the recharge by getting imported water.
Yeah, is that in all three scenarios they assume 7650 is how much native safe yield there
That
is.
is not what you said. I just want to be clear in all the numbers you were saying, and you may have meant that, but I just want to be clear for the record. All three scenarios assumed the same natural recharge.
Yeah, they did.
And then there were these other numbers that were moved around that people may disagree with.
And then my point was that there's 100,000 acre feet of artificial recharge that was added on to the native recharge in models 4 and 5 that wasn't added in
The
to model
supplemental.
to model 1. The
And
supplemental
and it's the difference
artificial
between,
recharge.
And it's the difference between the total pumping numbers and
And
the
so my point was, if
7650.
you run three models, one model has no artificial recharge, one model has 99,000 acre feet of additional recharge, and the third one has 168,000 feet of additional recharge, and then you compare the three of them, they're probably going to look different.
If I may, I appreciate that, and I will go dig into the details because I'm just, trying to understand. But I believe that's because nobody's pumping that water, so it gets to stay in the ground. But I may be wrong, and we'll go look at the numbers. In other words, it's totally logical that there would be more recharge in 4 and 5 because we're not pumping as much because the land use has changed. And those were assumptions that were put in the methodology, as opposed to the white paper where everybody who's pumping now gets to continue to pump. There's no change in that until you get to a moment of ramp down. So those are the things just to keep in mind, that those scenarios are not apples to apples because the land uses are not going to be apples to apples. And that water still exists.
So
It doesn't go away. We're not exporting it.
Under 4 and 5, the difference between the 7650 and the 10,000 is made up of artificial recharge. And so in scenario 4 and 5,
And
you're
what is
not-
the definition of artificial recharge in your
imported
belief?
water.
Imported water.
So,
Okay.
So in scenario 4 and 5, you're going to have from the years 2022 or whatever on, the basins assumed to be importing 2,000 or 3,000 acre feet a year
I see that.
of imported water, which
Okay.
is then going to be spread about amongst the parcels, but you won't have any ag or anyone because they've been kicked out in the nuclear option. So I think from a land use perspective, if you're worried about the small pumpers having to pay for recharge, the nuclear option has only the people left in the basin, which is the small pumpers, the water district, and the mutuals,
I-
left to pay for the imported water.
I think you've gone, and that's true, but you've gone down a road that wasn't part of my comment, but your
Okay.
comment is valid.
Okay.
That
Hey, let
wasn't
me-
part of my
let me
comment. All
try
right,
to
thank you, David.
summarize,
Thank you, David.
Why don't you see
We're-
what
we're
Don has
making-
to say?
We will get to public comment in a moment.
I have a comment that relates directly to what you've just been talking about.
Let me summarize, and I'll be happy to hear it on. What we are getting to is a level of TAC discussion almost. But to this point, before Don speaks, we've talked about a couple things that have bearing on policy that both Josh points out and Judy points out that I summarized earlier. And we want to capture other policy-related items that could be recommended considerations for scenarios going forward. And that's what I'm trying to capture. We are not the TAC. And we're getting down to terminology and clarification amongst folks that while we have some level of knowledge of water, that's why we're perhaps misunderstanding each other. Don, go ahead, please, sir.
I think I can clarify the modified white paper scenario. The only difference between the white paper scenario that was actually run in the model and the one that was originally proposed is that the original white paper had a range of natural recharge from 7,650 on up to perhaps 11,000 acre feet. And in order to run a model of the sort that DRI was just pursuing, you have to have a definite number. You can't run with a range. And so the modified white paper is to take to define the natural recharge at 7650. That's why it's the same as all the rest of them. It's that simple. There's no other change that is material between the modeled run and the original white paper.
I appreciate your comments, Don, and I disagree with them. I think there was other changes, and that we, again, just want to say that even though it's being called the white paper model, Mojave Pistachios does not endorse that run as the white paper model. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. And that was clarified at the TAC also.
David, could you please repeat what you think out of this discussion should be potential policy issues?
The policy, well, issues related to policy would be thoughts from the scenario is that Josh points out what Don said is correct, but in fact it ended up a little bit from one perspective in terms of the artificial recharge, using Josh's terms, imported water or other supplemental water, that in fact it skews the comparison some. Because you had a range, if the range had been the same and assumed some of that, you think the results would have been similar. So you're pointing out that in terms of the policy of a freeze and then or a delayed ramp down, a delay until you do the ramp down, which is what that scenario is, it is not an apples to apples comparison with the other two, because in fact it had a lower amount of artificial recharge. It didn't get the advantages which might be assumed from that if you were trying to do a completely fair. That is essentially, it still was within the range of what was in the white paper, but my understanding is you're making a point that if it's not 100%, and it isn't going to be from land use, and it isn't going to be from Judy's point that the water is coming from a different area, but in fact, it was different.
Well, my real point is that it's disingenuous to call a model run a group's model run and then modify it. That just seems disingenuous. That's really my point.
Okay. Gene did call it modified. Don?
I'm going to make a comment here that the intention of those model runs was not an apples-to-apples comparison. It was to look at discrete, different approaches, just like the earlier models were. And in order to make some kind of direct comparison, you have to understand what the assumptions were that went into the model in the first place. Unfortunately, the variable space that we are trying to work with here is really complex, and it is almost impossible to make apple-to-apple comparisons. You always are trading something for something else. This is real-world engineering.
I would agree, Don, and I think you're both 100% right. It is still, by some people, the intent may not have been to do apples and apples, but some people, unless it's pointed out, will assume that. And that's what Josh is doing. That's what I understand it to be. But you're 100% right, and overall in the modeling scenarios, these aren't going to be the final. We're gathering the impact of variables in trying to help the GA determine what would be the best final. They haven't modeled the final yet. They said that today. They're still looking at what might be close to the final.
That's absolutely correct. You paraphrased what I just said. The variable space has a huge number of variables that are all in play, and we are looking at a handful of them. The fact that the modified white paper isn't quite the same as the original is not so important as the fact that the white paper, a version of it, a set of variables was selected that were consistent enough, like it was a 7,650 acre-feet per year recharge. It was consistent enough to be able to be considered as part of this set of scenarios. So I think it's very important that we all not read more into the scenarios than's there. The point has been made over and over that those are not allocations, for example, but there are many more aspects of it that are also being misinterpreted, and it produces some confusion. And it's unfortunate that we have such a complex problem to work with, but we didn't choose the problem.
Yeah, I think you phrased it correctly, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to clarify it as best possible and not muddy the waters further with the variety of technical backgrounds that we have on this committee and in the audience. So we've got 2 items captured. Are there other observations from PAC members?
I have one question. It's just a question, probably
Could you
for...
use your microphone, please, Pat?
Yeah, it's on.
You got to get close to it.
Guess I'm not close enough. I don't know if I quite understand if there is going to be another model run, and if there is, will it show what happens if the water district, Searles Valley, and Indian Wells Valley Water District, if they spread their pumping out into a different area rather than concentrating it in the areas where it is right now? It seems that it's a little skewed to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but you know, for example, they show the big blue zone bubble, if you will, over the North Brown Road or north into the valley, and then down over, I would say, basically south of China Lake Acres area out in there's Indian Wells Valley Water District wells. And if they move those or pump them less or give them a rest, would that change that? Would that give recharge back into that area? And are those going to be models that are run so that we could see that rather than just concentrating on a big blue bubble over Brown Road?
Yeah, I think your point is very similar to what Judy was trying to make. And to answer your first question, my understanding from 3 weeks ago, and from today, there will be at least one, if not more than one more model run.
Well, I understand that there might be more models run. I do get
We
that.
don't know what's in it.
But I'm curious to know if the water district has plans to spread their pumping out over a larger area and maybe balance it better rather than pump heavily in 1 or 2 areas or 3 or 4, whatever they are. And
Well,
will
as
that
far-
show up in a model? Will it show you where you should be pumping and how you could balance that?
Well, Dave is right. There is intent to run at least one more model, perhaps more. The specifics of what those model scenarios are hasn't been determined yet. As far as plans for the district currently to spread pumping out, we have one new well, but it's also in the southwest area. It's going to be equipped and ready for service within the next year and a half.
In the same area, though?
That's what, I just said that.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, I think that maybe is my issue.
And aren't you going to pump it at a greater rate than the other wells? Isn't it going to be equipped to pump at
It
2,200?
may pump at a greater rate, but it can only pump what our customers take. We can't pump more than. So when the tank gets full, the well shuts down. So it's not like it comes out at 1,200 gallons a minute and runs.
Okay, I think we've captured a couple valid points, and we're going to make them to the board overall. And I'm going to bring up one more at the end.
I have a question.
Renee has a question.
This has to do with the shallow well impact summary that's on the second to last page. I don't know, how did they come about with these figures of costs to mitigate? Like, like what kind of data did they use? Because these are relatively large numbers. And who would be responsible for the cost and the mitigation?
Well, that's one of the things we were making a recommendation on an action item coming up.
Okay.
Agenda item. I don't know how they calculated the costs on this. I don't think it was covered today.
If I may, Lorelei, if you take the number of wells and calculate that amount, that's only $78,000 to deepen that well. Anyone here who's drilled wells knows that's actually low. It's
What?
actually no.
Say that again?
It's to deepen each well.
Oh,
okay? And
you want to know
the
what it
cost
costs?
Yeah,
You know
what's
what
it cost?
What it costs?
What's it cost?
What would it cost 3 years ago to go down another 100 feet? I think it was $13K is what it cost me. Boat from Mojave, didn't it?
I would think 78K sounded high to me when you
That's
said
why
that.
that was why
I don't
was
know, not the
questioning.
numbers that people are giving me from well drillers, not at all.
Okay.
Really?
Not at all.
A new well, of course, that's only a drilling fee for 100 feet, too. It's not,
But I think it's
it-
more than just drilling, Don, on the shallow wells.
well,
Well, I think the cost for private domestic well owner is probably quite a bit less than $78,000. No.
That's why I said I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Like, I don't understand what they put in mitigation. That probably just doesn't mean the well. If the property's impacted, where it's not livable, maybe the property's not livable. And if the well's gone dry, is that what they're calculating in there too?
I
For
think
those-
that's an excellent comment,
I
and
just
I
copied
think
it.
it should be referred back to say that given that shallow wells was one of the things that we have a subcommittee, and it's this PAC, we want to know, what does cumulative mitigation cost mean? Are we buying out that piece of property? What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't recall, there were several people on this committee and in this room that were present today in the TAC, and I don't recall that being discussed.
I don't think this slide was shown today during the
Yes.
TAC, was it?
I don't remember
I
it.
think it was a quick,
I don't
Go
remember
through.
seeing this today. I was just going to say, perhaps, I understand the issues with Stetson controlling costs for the Groundwater Authority, but when there's presentations like this, I think it would be advantageous to have somebody from Stetson at least on the phone. They can watch these
they're
presentations.
usually driving back at the time.
Well, but they have,
I agree.
they have staff that's still
I
in the
agree.
office.
I think the point is, we have an item coming up where we're asked to look at who is responsible for the mitigation costs. Here are what some analysis assumed might be the costs in a comparison, and we certainly need to know what's the basis for this so that we can judge how to allocate it, perhaps. So it's a valid point.
Yeah, the
David,
point
oh, go ahead.
the point I was trying to make is I think
That-
their questions are being raised that
We can't
none of us here,
answer.
and you're being put on the spot that you don't have the answer and I don't have the answer. And if someone from Stetson was on the phone,
And I'm
they
not
could-
afraid to say I don't know. We'll ask, but it's a valid question to ask. Lyle?
I do
that
read-
chart was not in the stack of handouts I got right after Jeff Helmsbury brought them in, dropped them off the table outside. I don't
Okay,
have
so
that.
it wasn't, so this was in the TAC, or in the
yes.
PAC presentation. That explains why I didn't remember it from the
Yeah. Yeah, it's not,
TAC.
yeah, I haven't
Okay.
seen that one. It wasn't in the tax handouts today.
Okay, well, so we got,
As were a number.
we
yours
are
all
special.
different.
We got something new.
Yeah.
I think generally speaking, they talk about deepening wells. If that doesn't work, drilling a new well. And if that doesn't work, providing infrastructure to bring other sources of water. So those are probably the general kinds of things that are wrapped up in these numbers.
Yeah, but it'd
your
be good
point's
to
well
know what
taken.
the assumptions are, and I know you guys, in your report tonight, specify some of that. Not the numbers, but the options.
Yes, in a broad brushstroke manner, we do.
Okay, Judy, you had a comment? One more?
No.
Any other member comment?
The only one I had was back to this. If you run a model and it shows that you have water available on Brown Road, will that mean that the water district will move their pumping? Because it looks to me like these shallow wells where most of the people are that are being impacted are also very close to the water district wells. Maybe I'm wrong, but it kind of looked like that on the maps to me in a general way. And if that's the case, then are you guys going to spread yourselves out where those blue bubbles exist? And will you be making an effort to do that? And if so, will it show up in a scenario?
You may recall that a couple of years ago, the district owned Neal Ranch. We made a transaction with through Mojave Pistachio to acquire property they had to the south part of the basin and traded Neal Ranch for that. Part of that agreement was that the district would not drill to the north, and they would not drill to the south. So to answer your question, we can't drill based on that agreement.
Well, perhaps there's already wells drilled.
I have a comment. I do not think it is fair to put Mr. Zadiba on the spot. For one thing, he has 5 people making decisions for him who aren't here, namely the Water District Board of Directors. And I think your questions are good questions, Pat, but at this time, I think they're a little premature, and I kind of think it's unfair to put Don on the spot. If you want to put him on the spot, go to the next board meeting and ask the entire board the questions you're asking him right now.
Judy, I
I
agree
think-
with that.
Yeah, I think the question, I agree, Judy, but I think the question is the same as, or very similar to what Judy brought up from a modeling perspective, and could therefore be from a policy perspective, because if the scenario were more of a water market and
There you go.
eliminating ag by the value of their water rights and trading, that could change the whole equation, because you would, if you look at the results of that modeling, you would say you need to change the pumping to a different area.
That's the only point
That's
I'm trying
the
to
obvious, that's,
make. Yeah, it's obvious if you look at the modeling and mapping.
West here, I'd like to just throw in a couple other comments. It's my understanding of these modeling runs, I guess they were waiting for modeling ideas, management scenarios to come out of the closed meetings with the lawyers, and that didn't happen. Meanwhile, as I understand it, these modeling runs were cooked up, and as Don Decker mentioned, there's a lot of variables, and they were considering things like, if we were importing water, how do we get that water into the system? So that's why they were considering multiple variables, and that's why we ended up in a situation where we're comparing the future of the valley with different assumed recharges. In one case, it's just a natural recharge, and in 2 cases, it's natural recharge plus additional water that's being pumped into the ground, what Josh called the artificial recharge. So that artificial recharge, as I understand it, came from trying to consider ways that we might introduce imported water into the basin. And as I think someone has already noted, that was not meant to put these models on an equal basis, kind of to look at the long-term effect on the valley. And one other comment I want to throw in here is that I think this is the first phase of an iterative process. I think the next phase would be exactly what Pat has suggested. Once the Groundwater Authority starts arriving at some modeling scenarios they want to see done, it would seem like the next phase would be then what would our next action be as a management action to even out the pumping across the valley once we've lit on some fundamental approach. So this is kind of the groundwork, as I think you mentioned earlier too, to try to come up with the fundamental approach to moving forward.
right, and it's the natural progression. And let me make one more comment to throw out, given comments last week and comments today, comments tonight as well, is we've got at least we've gathered 2 major sets of comments here that we would make that are policy related. They also cross the boundary into technical a little bit because you can't extricate those. But it would be, my proposal for the group to consider is that we recommend to the GA that the TAC, if they have a scenario that they're thinking of for the next one, that it have TAC review, since the TAC and the PAC meetings are 1 week after the next Groundwater Authority meeting. 7 days. If they have a scenario that they decide they want to look at, having heard of comments that came out of the TAC today and comments that are coming out of the PAC, plus things they may have in mind from their own assessment and their own thoughts on this, that a 1 week delay in exposure to get the TAC's technical assessment of it, and of course we would see it that afternoon as well, but it's more critical for the TAC to see it and to weigh in with their recommendation in public on that scenario before the board assign the scenario to be modeled. What do you all think of that?
I think it's an interesting idea. I think there are many possibilities that could be run besides the ones that we have suggested. I'll offer a slight variation. Instead of storing purchased imported water, what happens if a user like the water district would use that water directly as a possibility? You know, we haven't, the trouble with scenarios like this and what we're talking about is the practical side of it, which is how to go about doing it, is not discussed, nor should it be in a groundwater management scenario. But there are many other possibilities. But again, I say, does the GA board have the time to do this when in fact the GSP is supposed to be ready and done and in DWP's hands by January 31st of next year?
So you oppose having the TAC look at it next week?
I didn't say that. I'm just offering.
I agree.
I'm just offering this up.
And I was proposing a way that we could recommend that there is at least one or more scenarios that get a technical and a policy look at with the public observation 1 week, 3 weeks from today, in the public, in front of us at both of those two committees, that should not delay the schedule, since there is no model yet assigned, and as I know of, there's no scheduled meeting prior to the next GA at which a decision might be made behind closed doors as to which way to go. Or they could ask the TAC, give us your proposal. If you had two scenarios to run, what do you think technically, and what do we think I said politically. I meant policy. Sorry. That's what I'm trying to do, is trying to ensure that we make the most efficient use of the time in the two committees to help the Groundwater Authority and have public input.
I agree with your recommendation. I would like to have the tax input for recommendation.
So it'd be to do one of those two things that I recommended, is review a scenario they want to look at, or have the TAC recommend. Either one of those two.
Yeah, I think either one. Have the TAC involved. And you said also bring it to the public too.
Right. Well,
Right.
When the TAC and the PAC are involved, the public gets it.
Yeah, I think it should be reviewed by the TAC first before they go ahead and approve another modeling scenario.
Other opinions?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what you said, I'd go along. Let's give them a shot. Give TAC a
We're getting to where we
decision.
have to make a decision if we have a chance at making a deadline or close to a deadline.
Something's going to have to happen.
And we want it to be done
soon.
as much in public as possible.
Yes.
And with as much technical and policy input as possible.
Yeah. There you go.
Is that the general consensus?
All right.
Okay, let's open this up to the more public comment. Derek's been patient.
Thank you. Derek Hoffman, attorney for Meadowbrook. And I want to echo some of the earlier comments by Josh and by Judy about the process and how we came about with these scenarios. And regarding scenarios 4 and 5, just to be clear for the record, I refer you all to my comments earlier today at the TAC. It was about 1:50 p.m. on the video. You can see my comments there. I'm going to reiterate much of those points. But these model scenarios came out of that room over there. They came out of closed session. And there's a lot of policy built into that. And by having the decisions made in closed session, you, the policy committee, are deprived of the opportunity of weighing in on what the policies ought to be to support the decision-making process. And I think that's a concern. Just to be clear, the allocation concepts that are reflected in scenarios 4 and 5 today are not agreed upon. In case anyone was wondering, I just want to make that clear. That's not a negotiated resolution. Meadowbrook doesn't certainly agree with them. And I've also mentioned earlier today, I've asked, the concept of the 86% is largely what I think is driving the issues that Judy was talking about, where there's still a lot of problems in the southwest and the southeast area because there's no ramp down over there. And Mr. Janis, if you'd humor me, I'd ask you to just go to slide 19, slide number 19, the numbered 19. Let's see, one more down, please.
Is that
It's
it?
number 19 at the bottom, right-hand corner. They don't all have numbers. Maybe you need to come up.
That one did.
It's the water level change number 4. That one, thank you.
20.
No, it's 19 on mine.
Says
Go
20
figure.
up here on the chart. Sorry.
Downloaded this from the website. In any case,
We hid a slide from you.
in any case, I've asked for the support, the legal support and the technical support for the concept of extending Federal Reserve water right pumping both off the base and to other pumpers. I've asked for that and I haven't received it. I was told at the TAC that something might be forthcoming, but that's a major policy question. And I think you ought to know the answer to that question. I sure would like to know it. Because what they're saying is that 86% of pumping among selected pumpers don't have to ramp down, whereas agriculture has to ramp down all the way, or in most cases, nearly almost all the way. So on that note, I just want to point out a couple of things that have been presented here to the committees today. The first comes from the presentation at the TAC, and it talked about historical rate of drawdown 2010 to 2015. And this is in the TAC materials today. And you'll notice that at the top left corner, Brown Road, where Meadowbrook is, the rate of drawdown is very minimal. The red shows the faster rate of drawdown from 2010 to 2015. And then the solution that's being proposed here through scenario 4 is to get rid of all the agriculture and stop that pumping. And yet the result is you still have what I'm calling and what DWR is calling unsustainable, undesirable results in the southeast corner and the southwest corner. So you haven't solved the problem. That's the issue. And when we talk about sigma, I don't want to cite chapter and verse here, but think about what was mentioned earlier today. Chapter 3, coming back to you in a couple weeks, is the crux of sigma. It's the sustainable management criteria. It's the minimum thresholds, the measurable objectives, and the sustainability goal for the GSP. That's what sigma is all about. And originally, the PAC was going to be tasked with the decision of what does significant and unreasonable mean for reduced water levels? What does significant and unreasonable mean for loss of groundwater storage? What does significant and unreasonable mean for impacted water quality? And we go down the list of the 6, or really 5 in this case, undesirable results to be evaluated and decisions made based on policy recommendations. Instead, policies are being decided in closed session. So I just want to say, and I'll be wrapping up here shortly, but when you say that Chapter 3 is just coming back to you, I think that ought to raise some concern, because what that means is it's being drafted. And you're being presented with what all those things ought to be. And I get we have to start somewhere, but I don't recall any of you being asked so far to weigh in on what those sustainable management criteria ought to be for the basin. So in the meantime, these modeling scenarios don't appear to me, and I'm not a hydrogeologist, I'm not a modeler. I'll leave that to Mr. Teasdale, but these proposals don't appear to achieve what sigma requires, and that is avoiding undesirable results. And so my overall concern is that these proposals are overly provocative, they foster conflict, and really, I can't see DWR approving a plan based on something like this when there's still a good portion of the basin that sees falling water levels. So I think we all have a lot of work to do here, but keep in mind that the decision-making process matters as well. So I'll stop there, and I appreciate your time and listening.
Thanks, Dirk. Don?
I have about 3 different items that are pertinent to what you guys have been talking about. I'll repeat again that the scenarios are attempts to explore various aspects of what aspects of the basin management could be manipulated, could be adjusted, could be driven, and observe the result. And they are not, in and of themselves, they are not something that is an item that could be taken into the GSP. And they were never intended to be that. Now, I myself, none of us on the TAC ever saw these scenarios before today either. And I certainly am not in a position to defend this. If I had seen this earlier myself, I would have protested the spending the money on it. Not to condemn what's been done, but it's an incomplete scenario. A lot can be determined, can be discovered without actually going through the modeling endeavor. You can carefully write down the input parameters of what could be a model run, and it has the input, it has the timeline inherent. It can be done with a spreadsheet, literally. In fact, the domestic well owners proposed scenario, we gave it to Stetson as a spreadsheet, and you can learn as much from it as you can learn from the full-blown run, and it costs next to nothing. So we could actually be exercising here many, many more potential runs, if you will, at the spreadsheet level at a fraction of the cost and time. That's just a comment to you guys. As far as trying to engage the TAC prior to actually spending money on a run, there are several of us on the TAC have been pressing this ever since the issue of creating various scenarios was brought forth, the idea that such a thing would be done without TAC input. We have protested, and the board is perfectly aware of that protest, and you can see what the result is. So I congratulate the PAC if you guys would, I'll say, back us up. I think that the PAC and the TAC are critical elements of the whole process, and the failure to engage those committees in a totally meaningful way is a big mistake. The other last little piece I've got for you, and you can use this over and over, the Kunkel and Chase, that's a paper on basin groundwater from about 1968, made an estimate of groundwater in storage, and it's 2 million acre feet in the top 200 feet of water. So if you dewatered the basin in some manner by 200 feet, you would have in your reservoirs 2 million acre feet. So if you do the arithmetic, you'll discover that it's about 10,000 acre feet per foot of dewatering. So you can use that. That number is accurate to 5 or 6%. So you can use it over and over to make estimates of what would happen if you were to either add or subtract water from the basin, from the water balance.
Thanks, Don. A point of clarification on your second point. The TAC and the PAC were both presented the first few slides that I showed here on the scenarios 3, 4, and 5 model runs that were to be conducted, and our model run 3 was already in conduct at the time, but it was 1 month ago when both of them were presented that those scenarios were being run. So this wasn't the first, unless you weren't at that meeting.
No, I was.
But you didn't have an input before they were run, which was your point.
My input, and I don't think all the other inputs were totally incomplete. The slide that summarized what the run was to consist of was very sketchy. It's where you get started. When you actually take that as far as creating a spreadsheet that has the elements that will then be fleshed out to go into the actual flow model, now you've got something you can actually look at.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to clarify for folks that knew we saw the top level piece of this, but I wanted to clarify more so your point was that neither the TAC nor the PAC had exposure to any of it before that first run started. And then the exposure we did get 1 month ago was not to the level you just described.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I had a comment I'd like to make regarding Mr. Hoffman's observation. I think when we reach sustainability in this basin, it's going to look much like that, because the water naturally flows from the mountains towards the east, and the water is good near the mountains, and it gets worse as you get further to the east. The goal is to have the total recharge equal to the total pumping in the basin, and it may well look just like that or something like that when it's done. The only thing this doesn't show well is the water that's migrating down from the north, and I asked that question today, as you probably heard, and that's because that's more clay up there. That red area in the northwest, the water is still coming down, but that's clay. So I'm going to suggest that this is very much what it'll look like when we achieve sustainability.
The south and southeast and the northwest are all low transmissivity areas. And what Wes just said is correct. We will never have this basin, nor did Mother Nature ever have this basin in a situation where the water levels were entirely in equilibrium. It's always in a dynamic mode. So, recharge is varying year to year as the precipitation changes.
And as the flow rate across the valley varies at levels in the aquifer.
That's correct. And the plant communities at the old China Lake Playa, the phreatophytic community, varied in time too, not over necessarily just a year, but as the water was more available or less available, those plant communities died off and rebuilt over and over again. And there was always time lags between water available and, evapotranspiration. So I think the colors make the effects that we're seeing very dramatic, which of course is important just to kind of capture your mind. And we're talking in this scenario about a rather drastic change in the way we pump. If you look at scenario number 2, there actually is a scenario that has the water district accepting potable water from AVEC, and the southwest pumping does, in fact, go down proportionately, and you can see the improvement in the water levels in the southwest accordingly.
Thanks, Don. One point you make that's valid is everything you said was valid. However, one point I wanted to bring out is there were 2 previous model scenarios that were run to this that give other looks at pumping in the valley, scenarios 1 and 2.
I'll be brief. I would point out that those 2 scenarios you just mentioned were actually vetted by the TAC beforehand, and notice the outcome.
Agreed.
And just to respond briefly to Mr. Katzenstein, you have to understand the regulations and what they require for sustainability. Okay, you have to avoid undesirable results across the basin. This model scenario that's being presented here shows continued falling water levels after 50 years. Sigma requires achieving sustainability over 20 years. So I am saying that if your plan is to look like this, I don't believe DWR will approve it, and that's my concern.
Yeah, one clarification there, Derek. You've used the word proposal and plan, and these are scenarios that are intended to be used to inform a plan. So we've not yet seen a plan or a proposal. This is engineering. This is how you develop a plan that should get to mitigate all those things that we're going to see next week or next month in Chapter 3.
I would just respectfully respond that if that were the case, I think it could have been easily dealt with in open session.
Yeah, and I just also wanted to say that these may be just, proposals to go into the plan, but the plan's going to be written in the next couple of weeks. And that plan that gets written is going to determine the livelihood of people in the valley for the next number of decades.
Yeah, I don't
So-
know that it's 2 weeks, but it's soon.
Well, the management objectives and thresholds are in Chapter 3, which is supposed to be coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Right.
So in the next couple of weeks, people in this valley should know what their future is going to look like, and they'll be able to make business decisions and stuff, and they're being decided off of this.
I think you're presupposing what's going to be in that chapter, but we'll see.
Again, but I'm just saying that's based off of prior experience.
Okay. Any other comment? Any other public comment? Okay, let's go to item number 6, Shallow Well Mitigation Plan report from the Ad Hoc Subcommittee. Josh, you reported on this last time. Does the committee have a spokesperson? Spokesman?
Judy.
Judy, spokesman,
Thank
spokeswoman?
you. This was sent to you last night, I believe, by David. If you don't have a copy in front of you, I apologize because at the last month's meeting, I believe Lauren provided copies of our packet, and I thought she would again, and we don't have one. And if I'd have known that, I'd have copied each of you one. But the committee met. The committee didn't know where to start exactly, so I spent about a week writing up what I thought that the PAC wanted us to discuss, which were items B, C, and D from the April agenda, or is it the March agenda? I forget. The April agenda. And I presented it to the committee. We discussed it. They liked it. They wanted some things moved around. In particular, the item they wanted to move around was the mitigation as part of for a funding option. I did that for them. I sent them all copies of it. And basically what we did was we took the items from the shallow well mitigation plan and discussed ways to evaluate shallow wells. There's a list of 4 items. We felt that shallow wells should, of course, all be within the boundary of this basin 654. And the wells should be for domestic purposes with reasonable landscaping. The well must be registered with the groundwater authority before it can apply for any kind of mitigation purposes. The well should be drilled to AWWA standards, and actually the presentation by Jean Moran today had that in it to some degree with her schematic of the well and how much water should be above the perfs and all that. We also said that if the well owner had a driller's log, he should present that to the GA, and that if it had previously failed and been repaired at the owner's expense, any data from that should be presented. We also said that it was presumed that the GA board would hire qualified personnel to execute any kind of private well mitigation program. The GA will pay for well deepening or well replacement if the standing water level is at or below the well casing perforations. This would include driller's cost, additional well casing if the well is deepened, or new well costs, including casing and drop pipe. It is up to the responsibility of the well owner to keep his well in good condition, and he should pay for a pump and motor replacement. We discussed funding options.
Okay, before you go to funding options, clarification, is this, you're recommending, the ad hoc committee is recommending that the GA assume the financial responsibility to pay for what you've defined at, and then you've defined what the well owner would be responsible for. This is a recommendation.
It's a recommendation, yes.
It's just the wording.
It's just wording, and it was very difficult to do because, in fact, there has been no input from the GA board on this subject.
Well, and just, I think it may provide some clarity. The document that went along with this, some of the items that we discussed that didn't get written in here were like evaluate owner's responsibility from 0 to 100. So there was a lot of additional items in the document that we approved at the prior meeting that talk about, and so I think that the intention would be that after the well is thoroughly vetted and it's determined that it has met all the requirements and it's going to get 100% compensation, these are the type of things that would be replaced. So,
Clarification.
Yes.
First of all, I think this is exactly what the PAC should be doing. So I think this is a wonderful, detailed recommendation. I kind of heard that you were, I wanted to see if there was more. If I have a house and my shallow well means that I can't use my house, is there going to be some replacement water for some period of time? Or did I cut you off before you got to that? Sorry. Okay, good. All right, good.
I started this. So
Probably
why don't
my
we let her?
fault.
Why don't we let her finish and then come back? I'm sorry.
Okay. Where was I?
Owner responsibility.
Well, the owner responsibility is to maintain his well and take care of it. That means his equipment. Okay. We discussed domestic well registration and that a form was presented to Mr. Zadiba, who sent it out to some well owners. It's right here. And if you need one, if you're listening in and you need a well registration because you have a domestic well, you can get them at the Indian Wells Valley Water District. In short order, we will take some of them to Herb's Hardware Store in Inyokern, which is where most of the country people go for hardware.
We took about 100 forms over to the Inyokern Community Services District already,
Well,
just so you're aware.
we will take some to Herb's Hardware Store.
Okay.
Okay?
Might hit Classic Burger, too.
Yes. Yes, that's a good idea. Besides, I like their food. Where was I? It's interesting. It's obvious that there's severe overpumping in this valley. And it is also apparent that if you are in an area that has large agriculture pumping, or you're close to the Indian Wells Valley Water District pumping, you are going to be impacted over time. And these impacts over time can go a mile or more, as has been shown on some of these model runs. Well, I gave you the criteria that we came up with, and I gave you the criteria that in order to qualify for mitigation, the well owner is going to have to take the responsibility of registering and contacting the GA board. I guess at the present time it would be the water district. After telling you that we thought that the GA should pay for wells that have been impacted negatively by water levels being lowered so that their wells no longer function properly. We came up with some funding options. And the funding options, the first one that we talked about was mitigation fees, and that the GA board is going to have to set a limit on pumping. It will be their decision, not ours. And anyone who is pumping over the amount that they set will contribute a fee that will go into a special fund for well mitigation. It cannot go into their general budget. It's going to have to go into a special fund so that it can be used accordingly. We also said that it would be in the best interest of the valley as a whole for all the major pumpers to pay into this fund. And as I said, and the fee would go to a special line item budget. And they're going to have that in their budget on a monthly basis so they know how much money they have in order to mitigate wells. We talked briefly about things like grants. There are grants available on an ongoing basis. You have to apply for the right one at the right time. There are, for instance, grants out there for the DAC community to use. And as a well owner, you'd have to, I presume, prove that you are a member of you are a disadvantaged person. We didn't know if there was possible federal funding available. That's why there's a question mark after that one. Other funding that we talked about is there are small funds available through the Inyo Mono Regional Water Management Group and other groups that might be there that could have funding available for this kind of project. We also talked about the fact that the GA board might want to set up a low-interest loan for people. That these are all future things that it's not our job to flesh them out because we don't really know what the GA board wants to do about it. We also talked briefly about the Navy COSO royalty funding. And with the issue of, because it was one of, I believe it was item D, was to evaluate pre-GSP impacted wells. As the report showed us today, there are 91 of them. And it will be up to the board to decide if they want to deal with those 91 wells. And if they do, they should use the same procedure as they do for wells that will be impacted in the immediate future. It is a legal responsibility of the GA board to deal with this issue, the entire issue. We also didn't have time to discuss other issues of the shallow well mitigation plan, but there are several of them. One of them somebody has touched on briefly already, and that is the possibility of areas where there are a lot of small shallow wells on like 2.5 acre parcels, if it would be possible for them to do something like join the Indian Wells Valley Water District, the Inyo Kern CSD. But those are items that need to be discussed not only by the GA board, but by the boards that govern those water agencies, the Inyo Kern CSD and the Indian Wells Valley Water District. And I hope Wes doesn't get too mad at me, but one area that comes to mind is the area between Mahan and Jack's Ranch Road, Inyo Kern Road, and, say, Bowman Road. There are a lot of small domestic wells or small co-ops in that area. The Water District already has some major lines in that area. Would it be, this is a question, would it be feasible for those people over time to hook up to the Water District? Would it be a good idea or not? That's something that needs to be explored. I'm not sure a subcommittee is the place to explore it. We talked about it briefly. We did not have time to talk about growth, which is something that was brought up at the last GA meeting. It also is a serious issue that affects the future water supply that needs to be discussed. And I'll let Pat and Josh and Wes talk away. I've talked enough.
I just kind of had two other things that I had brought up that I really didn't think deserved to get into the report, but were just kind of additional suggestions of mine. And one of them is, like, if you look at this chart right here, you know, I call it zones of benefit and zones of impact. So, like, if you looked at this area here, let's say you were pumping by USBR 6, and you were a small ag person up there in that blue area that's actually rising by 10 feet. And let's say you're pumping and you're paying into a mitigation fee. You know, is it fair that if someone over by the GAC well on the east side of Ridgecrest, if their well goes bad, should your mitigation fees from an area, you know, or should there be some analysis done to say that, you know, in this southeast region, who are the major pumpers, and then who's impacted? So the major pumpers pay into a pot, and then whenever people are impacted, they dip into that pot. So that was just one of my suggestions, was that, you know, should it be a valley-wide thing, or should they make kind of management areas as far as related to mitigation? And the other one I thought about was for some of the disadvantaged communities was poor people, and maybe people who have physical or mental disabilities, or people who've bought a house and who just knew nothing about wells, and they just didn't have the, you know, the money or the foresight to do the AWWA standards and ensure all the paperwork's done. So I guess that was one of my other suggestions, was that there needs to be some thought as to if, you know, a person with a handicap who's older and disabled comes in and they haven't maintained their well, they haven't done some of these criteria, but they're indigent or something, you know, should there be some consideration given to a relaxing maybe of some standards, you know, as a, or is that just kind of a special case left up to the, but those were just kind of small side issues. In general, I think that the document represents well kind of the consensus of what we came
Well, I was
up
going to
with.
ask, so were you a minority opinion, or the way I read the document is the committee as a whole, all four of you agree with and the recommendation was that everybody in the valley pays into the mitigation fund.
Yeah, it's not. It wasn't a hill I was wanting to die on, I think, and so I said if they're okay with it, if I could just make a small little oral addendum that I think an additional idea might be to look at zones of impact and benefit, but I think that we all agreed that the more important idea is to get everyone on board with the idea of paying into a mitigation fund to help people who have been harmed, and we think if we can get there, then, you know, we could deal with some of the smaller details. I think that represents kind of what we came up with. So.
Okay.
Right, don't forget, well, we haven't even gotten to square one yet. It's going to be reevaluated in 5 years.
Yep.
Right. Lorelei asked a question that we did touch on, although we didn't really have a good answer for it. But it's you wake up and you can't flush and you can't get a drink because it's shut off. You know, whatever happened, happened. And at that point, that responsibility has to still be determined, but you're out of water. So we did bring that up at our ad hoc. And we did talk about, should, you know, a pony tank be dropped off at your house? If you have a storage tank, should a water truck be brought over and you get 2 weeks worth of water to tide you over. You could maybe buy it from the water district or something, and like a water hauler would. But in other words, is there a way to tide you over, so to speak, so that you can actually run your faucet? I think we just didn't have a good way to do it for sure, or who would be responsible for buying that water. Because in the end, if you just simply had a lightning strike on your well box and your power went out and you didn't have your pump isn't running, it's really nobody's problem but yours. I mean, that's an act of God, and you need to, get your wallet out and go fix it yourself. So, those are to be determined, but perhaps, in putting all this together eventually, if somebody has a truck full of water, a water tank kind of delivery truck or something that could fill a storage tank or partially fill one, you could buy a few 100 gallons of water to hold you over. Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, and I think that somebody could drop a tank off for someone, if they needed it. It's one of those, who's going to do it and how much is it going to cost problems.
Yeah, I think that was kind of one of the policy questions that should be answered at some point is there a pre-established amount? Like maybe we say, if anyone comes in with a reasonable claim and their water's off, we just have the set criteria. We either give them a tank or a refill on their current tank, and we spend up to
some amount.
3/4 out, whatever that predetermined amount is, and during that investigative period, if it's determined that, hey, you don't qualify for whatever reason, it's not like you go back and charge them that $3,000. It's just that, and so that's, I think, a policy decision. If someone walks in the door, they're out of water that day, but it's going to take 2 weeks to figure out if they qualify or not, and I think kind of our recommendation was, we probably should have a water truck or a tank or a system that's set up to stopgap. And then
something.
Yeah. I would like to point out that there are people on North Brown Road, quite a few, who are already hauling water. Because you see them driving down North Brown Road with a storage container in the back of their pickup truck full of water.
I actually can comment on that too, though. There were a lot of wells, the clay layer that gets talked about. There were wells out there that were drilled before anybody really understood what that was. And so people thought roots got in their well or whatever, or the water just tastes disgusting. So they haul water because it tastes a lot better if you buy it from somewhere. And then they just use if they use their well, they use it for something else. So I don't know that we can determine all those things in one meeting or one ad hoc or whatever. So,
no.
That's kind of beyond us. They are things, though, that should be considered. And I don't really want to, I wouldn't put the bill on anybody for poor maintenance or lack of responsibility, personal responsibility. If your roof leaks, it's not my problem. I shouldn't have to fix your roof just because you were sloppy maintenance,
As you can tell, we got into a pretty good philosophical discussion on the role of socialism in water policy. So it was pretty exciting.
I think we did good. Wes, did you have comments?
Yes, I had some comments, and I generally wait. I'm very polite, and sometimes I don't get my turn, but I do have my turn here. So, first of all, several comments. I want to make, from my point of view, the discussion of funding sources, the Groundwater Authority has the obligation to fix the wells under the conditions we've talked about here. And grants and other sources are nice. They benefit everybody. But the bottom line, the buck belongs to the water district if they can't find the grants, if they can't get the other sources of money. They have the obligation to cover that, and any grants they can find is great. It benefits us all because it spreads our money further. I meant the GA, right. Unless you're willing to pick that up. Sorry about that.
I heard that too.
Shoot, I thought we put one through there. Thank you.
It's okay, West. His hair is already white.
Yeah, so is mine. Yeah. Another observation, to answer Judy's question, I certainly think if my well goes bad because the water level drops too far, that hooking me up to the water is a good option to consider. But don't throw my body on the fire. I like my well water, and I like even the arsenic makes my eyes sparkle, keeps my teeth strong. So just don't misinterpret Judy's comments as being I'm wanting to be hooked up to the water district.
I don't want them to misinterpret my comments that you do. I said it's something that's listed in the shallow well mitigation plan.
Right.
That we talked about having a future ad hoc meeting to discuss this and growth and some of the other issues that we brought up ourselves.
And once again, I heard you say the word mitigation. That I think is the key word. If my well goes dry, then that's a key mitigation option, or if my well fails. So don't ask me to give away a good well right now.
Absolutely not.
So, third observation regarding Josh's question about should someone in the blue pay for a bad well in the red? We're in this basin all together, and you can think of that water as a big, broad stream that flows from the mountains underground, and the areas of the south to the east and the southeast are probably never going to have good water. You could probably stop all pumping tomorrow, and all pumping, and the good water is going to come from the blue area. So the bottom line is going to be, we're going to find that the water is going to continue to flow from the mountains to the west towards the east. It will evaporate along the way. It will get pumped, and we're in this basin all together. We need a basin-wide solution. And one final observation. As far as other subjects to be discussed, I feel also that wells can fail due to groundwater quality dropping below a useful threshold. The charts that were shown today in the TAC show that as probably less of a likely or of a smaller magnitude than shallow wells failing due to groundwater level dropping too low. But I think there needs to be a mitigation discussion for wells that may fail, shallow wells that may fail due to groundwater quality failure. And that could be particularly troublesome because if it happens to one well, it's probably going to happen to a neighborhood of wells. It's probably going to be a region of wells that are going to fail because the groundwater has been allowed to degrade in those areas due to the way the groundwater is managed. So I think as a future area to be considered on this list of future topics, we should also address mitigation of wells that fail due to groundwater quality.
That's
good.
That's a non-trivial area, and I think that's why we didn't get to it. It's complicated.
It was complicated, and I think that was one of the things where we did discuss that if you had a set amount of money to offer somebody to repair a well, they might be better off, if they were in the right place, they might be better off hooking up to a water district well or a municipal or something where they would have a steady supply of water without maintenance. And, so the money would be better spent, and especially for some people, because they're really not capable of taking care of something that needs maintenance like that anyway. So if the whole area was degraded, you might wind up better off to move a water district pipe into that area. And anyway, those were some of the things we discussed. We didn't have answers for. There you go. To be determined over the next few years, I guess.
That, in fact, might be your only option, is to bring in an external water source. But I'm once again, I recommend that as a future topic for future discussion, and not as something that we attempted to answer.
Other member comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on something Pat was talking about. Your well craps out one Sunday morning. What the heck do you do? Well, I had that happen. Been there, done that. We understand this. And I will tell you, boats from Mojave on a Sunday morning sent somebody up and got me back online. Okay? So there are some good people out there that will take care of your problems and help you out. And I'm here to tell you, I got a lot of respect for them folks. So, okay.
Other comments?
I just have a question. Josh had brought up about whether someone that's in the southeast should be, eligible to get funding if their well fails from the payment of the people that are living in the northeast or northwest where there's more water recharge. I don't see how that there's going to be enough money in the mitigation fee overall, the whole valley, where you could regionalize it. I think the mitigation fee is going to take a long time to develop, and then you won't be able to even do that regional assessment, is what I'm saying.
And I think the entire committee recommendation that stood was the everyone is in this together concept. Any other concept? Any other comments?
I have a comment. My comment is, how many viable wells are there in the southeast? The southeast keeps being brought up. The water district was in the southeast originally. They moved because the water quality got poor. For all of you who live here, several months ago there was an article in the paper from the people who own the cemetery about they had to quit using their well because of water quality. There are people on Bowman Road, not too far east of Walmart, who used to use their own domestic wells, who no longer use them because of water quality. So this is sort of a general question. It's not for the policy committee, obviously, but how many viable wells are there left in the southeast part of the Indian Wells Valley anyway?
Any other board comment or panel committee comment? Member?
Just to kind of respond to Renee a little bit, the idea of management zones is from my experience over in all the water districts and the GSAs that we're in over in the rest of the valley, where even within one GSA they have different management areas because, like on here, I understand to West Point that over a geologic timescale there may be some equaling out, but on the timescale that the state's looking at, within one basin there can be discrete areas that have different management criteria, different sustainable objectives, thresholds, and everything, because there's, over tens of thousands of years, that's not the time scale that the Sigma law is requiring you to address. They're talking in, terms of decades. And so that was my only point, was that is it fair to ask a small pumper up in the Brown Road area who's got a couple acres of pistachios and is not harming any of their neighbors by their pumping to pay for someone in another region who's actually being impacted by a large pumper in a different area? So it was more of a conceptual question, and really don't need to push it any further than that. That's just this is where it came from, was my experience seeing it done in almost every other GSA on the other side of the hill.
Public comment. Okay, seeing none, the question for the group is, do we accept this report, want it to go forward at this point? And prior to asking ourselves that, does the committee believe they're ready to forward this, or did you want to further refine, perhaps in answer to the question that Lorelei asked? That was question number one, is do we want this to go forward as is, and question number two is, does the committee want to continue to meet to consider some of the other things you brought up?
Speaking for myself, I think it can go forward. I think we have some other things we can offer to the recommended future topics. Sure, it's kind of a coffee drinking, brownie eating get together, so we can do it.
So yes to both? I
think this should go forward. I agree to that. Over the next couple of months, I'm not sure how many ad hoc meetings I'd be able to make. So we've got harvest and different things before too long. And so I'm going to say that we should send this on, but that if there's a new ad hoc committee, I think that's great. I was not going to be able to be on it.
Okay, how about the committee as a whole? We agree with forwarding this as our consensus, and if so, we're going to vote on that.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'll enter.
Pat agrees.
There are some typos and things that need to be
Yeah.
cleaned up,
There
and
needs
so
to
I'd
be.
say if you guys, this will go appended to the report that we give to the GA, and so if you do a final version of this,
Okay.
and then I can append that to it.
I will do
So if we have a motion to that effect,
Before we have a motion, I'll make a comment real quick. I think our ad hoc generated sometimes more questions than answers. However, this is as ready as it can be right now. I think we should go ahead and turn it over to them and let them have a look at it. And if they want more from us, maybe after harvest, because I have the same issues Josh does. Maybe after harvest, we could start getting back together on it and perhaps tackle one or two at a time some of these issues that come up. And we may need other people like Don Zadiba to chime in on some of these remarks. But I think they're going to have to.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I just make one last comment. Because of the schedule that's being driven for this plan, the more policy recommendations that come from the PAC now, rather than trying to get it comprehensive and perfect, you need to get those policy recommendations done so that they show up in those chapters. Then, as the chapters are reviewed, you can bring forward other things. I just think it's critical. Otherwise, what's going to happen is those chapters are going to get written, and then you're going to have to, make comments to get in there, and it won't come. So I think this is a good policy push. You need to push policy recommendations now in these next two meetings to get them in the chapters, and don't worry about your questions. I haven't even brought up all the land use things about consolidation that are required in the general plan. All those issues you brought up, the DWR has already created policies that are probably going to overrun all of the ideas that you had anyway about whether you can do a new water well or consolidate. So rather than go into all that all now, don't get lost in the weeds.
Yeah, I think of this as a foot in the door.
Thank you. We were directed to do this. I think it's a lot of work for a volunteer.
it's what we've been asking for a year. fighting
We
for it.
don't have a list of things that need a policy on so that we can even start from square one. I felt like since I decided I better draft something so we had something to talk about, I felt like I was walking through mud, gushy mud. I didn't know. I knew what, if I was going to write it for myself to present what I would write, but I wasn't writing for myself. I was writing, and in fact, as an East Kern Resource Conservation District representative, I was writing for every person who lives in this valley. And that's very difficult.
Okay, we need a motion.
I move that we turn it in,
That's correct.
and it's a foot in the door. We'll see where it goes.
So next week, give me a draft, the final
I will-
cleaned up version, and I will append that. Your motion is for you guys to do the final version, no content change, but correct the
Whatever it
I've
needs.
got
what
it on
needs.
my computer. So
Okay.
I'll do it.
Thank you,
And
Judy.
get it in, and so we need a second to that.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed,
Opposed?
yeah.
Okay. Any,
It's just too confusing, and I need more clarity on funding of this
it's a first level
mitigation.
recommendation.
And, some of the things we see coming down the road, I think, is not following Sigma and the tone of Sigma.
Okay.
Okay.
Abstentions? Recusals? Okay, motion passes. Note the vote, obviously. Okay, and the board, what I heard the committee ask was that they stay constituted but reconvene to consider subjects, and if we get asked for more clarity after harvest.
Well, I think we need more clarity on what policy issues we should be discussing. And I heard Lorelei say we need to do this because if we wait, we're not going to get counted in our detail.
Yep, and we got 1 week from now, we get the big chapter that, as was pointed out, that is going to really get us deep into that.
But in the meantime, we have a meeting in 3 weeks. So if Lorelei can get you
I have a question. I have a thought.
a list, in 3 weeks we can, if Pat and Josh can't do it, perhaps you can appoint somebody else to the committee or 4 new people or whatever to work on it.
I think she were talking about the whole pack.
Okay, 2 things. 1, I don't think you have to do any more work on the shallow well. I think your policy is nice and compact. Turn it in. I know you have a whole list of questions, and if you want to create a list of questions, but that is a good policy. The next item, if you call the next item, Dave, the next item is this referral on the managed growth. I would like to volunteer to bring a list that could be sent ahead of time on policy questions to think about to come up with a policy on the managed growth. I'd like to volunteer.
Let's talk about that when we get to that one, but yes.
Oh, okay. I thought we were there.
By the way, we just went down in history as the first time the TAC was closed before we were. Shorter meeting than we did.
Got it.
That's my point.
I mean,
what you're saying,
I just
and we
figure
have.
you're going to wrap this up in a few moments. So
no,
item 6
the
was
next
good.
one. Hopefully, the next one could go 2 hours, but hopefully it will not.
Then my parting comments is that I don't think you're ready to talk about item 6. That's my parting comment.
Item 6 is the one you just said put in.
Yes.
You just said 2 hours. Did you mean tonight? Because I don't think you're ready.
You're talking item 7.
Oh, sorry. I have to put my glasses on. Item 7. I don't think you're ready to talk about item 7.
Well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to clarify what our tasking is when we get to that item, which will be as soon as we got a vote recorded.
Got it.
Okay, so now let's go to number 7. Okay, and what we brought up out of this ad hoc committee last time, and I took it forward in the PAC report and to the GA, that the consideration, the scenarios that are being put forward are rather drastic. And every one of them, in terms of the overdraft in the valley, is drastic at some level, some more than others. And the nuclear option certainly got that nickname because it has some drastic, and folks referred to the potential angst, for lack of a better word, that might occur in the valley. And there had been no discussion about, well, why are we allowing growth to continue? And we thought it was a viable topic that the GA as a whole should take on at this point, even though it has limitations as to what it can address. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So that resonated somewhat with the board, but the limitations of it also cast some doubt on that and the timing of it. However, there was agreement that they thought it needed to be explored, especially in the context of public outreach and what thoughts there might be on that. And so they asked us to begin to look at it. But first couch it in terms that, and by the way, there a comment on the document. It's a little bit confusing to have refer to both GSA and GA. If we just refer to the GA, that clarifies a lot.
If you wanted to do that, I can do that. I put GSA where I thought that when they worked on that part.
They already are GSA.
I thought they didn't.
That's what I was informed today by the board. Is they formed the GSA in order to form and be assigned the GSA authority under the name of the GA. But let's let's not waste more time on that at this point. We can get clarity from a lawyer on that. Where I did want to go on this topic is the authorities that we're talking about that can control growth are the 5 entities in this community or in this basin that in fact comprise the primary membership. And Lorelei, if I say this incorrectly, let me know. But they are the 3 counties who have the authorities to control zoning, growth, all those things that would allow or be able to control growth. The 3 counties, the water district to a degree, and the city. And they are not going to abdicate their control of those that they have independently. But part of the reason the GA was formed, and we are lucky that unlike the San Joaquin, we are in a basin where there are only 5, and really 5, that have that authority, and they have formed a single GSA called the IWV GA. And it is a body that can, in fact, coordinate together with under a GSP, but not specifically in the GSP, and provide a coordinated plan to allow some managed, targeted growth, and how you do that and not violate the GSP, which they are responsible for. Okay, what did I say wrong, Lorelei?
I'm sorry, I also need a break. But besides that, okay, too much bottled water. I understand what you just said, but when you start talking about coordination, that is not what this is going to happen. Every single board member that's on the GSA and every single city council has 4 other members. I have no indication from any of them that they're going to abdicate land use responsibility to the GSA. So they are not going to be managing growth.
That's not what I meant by coordination. That's you're making the point I was about to make. It's the definition of the word coordination.
Okay,
in your
I
mind
also want
and
to
my
point
mind.
out, though, the SIGMA clearly states that this plan has to be based on the existing general plans and land use. Okay? There are already designations of what people can do. This GSP is required to take that into account. They're required to take the housing element into account. They're required to take that all into account. The fact that we haven't got there, I get that, but they are required by law in SIGMA to do that. It is not true that they just get to say, oh, there's no water, so of course we need to stop. It's much more complicated than that. So one of the policy issues, however, still remains the difference between the unincorporated areas and the city. And those are policy issues that have to be sorted out. You know, in the unincorporated areas, we only built 3 houses last year. That's it. I have checked the building permits for the last few years. There's no huge explosion of, we're building, out what's happening here. So I just wanted to clarify, when you start talking about coordinated management growth, that's not going to happen. All the GSA is going to do is allocate water. That's it.
Yeah, I understand. That's
right.
That's actually where I was headed.
Is that where you're going? Okay.
But it is a body that once we know what the requirements are, perhaps in parts of the basin, in parts of the aquifer, if there are managed areas, whatever it comes out in the GA, we want the communities, the 3 counties, the district, and the city are going to want to not do things that hurt the other, since there are boundaries, perhaps.
I don't know.
But they're going to be the coordination I was talking about is the awareness. But they don't have the authority, and that's where I was headed.
But the
GA doesn't have the authority to control growth itself.
I understand, but I'm just telling you that in my general plan update, my direction from my board, which includes the person, is to coordinate the unincorporated. What San Bernardino County does in Cerros Valley and the kinds of policies they come up with, good for them.
And that
the kinds of policies that Inyo County comes up with, good for them. So part of, it's based on land mass, what the city does. We all have a general plan, and we hope that everybody will be included. But I just want to go on record as pointing out that when the city updated their general plan, I was asked to speak to the Planning Commission, and that was by this advisory committee that did the general plan, however many people they had on it. They specifically asked me, standing right there, we don't think there should be anything in the county. You should just have open space.
I want to
Okay,
interject
hold
something
on,
here.
hold on. Let me just finish. So the management of growth by people's opinions is what we do through the general plan and through other sorts of things. It's not going to be done through the GSA. However, we need your committee, the PAC, the policy committee, to give input in this GSA on how do you see this all being weighed out? How do you see those growth patterns happening? And then there has to be something in that model for growth. It's just the way it works. There has to be something in there
Your
for
model?
growth. No, the GSA model. There has to be an accommodation. Sigma says that. The housing element says that. And what that looks like. Right now, the growth is 1 to 3%. We've had 1 to 3% from Kern Cog for the last 25 years in this valley, and we never hit it. So, you know.
I'd like to interject something here. This issue came up in the ad hoc meeting that we had about growth, and not that whether it should be or shouldn't be. The issue was, with new growth, how should they pay for their additional impact on the water system? And that's what we were discussing in the ad hoc group. And were there ways to deal with that? And in other states there are, and we were discussing it. I don't think we're ready to discuss it at all tonight. And it was not the issue of, well, whether there should be growth or not. It was if there was growth, it was going to be an additional burden on our already overtaxed groundwater. And so more imported water would be needed is one way to look at it. So how could that be dealt with? That's what we were discussing.
I get that. I just want to give you a different perspective. It's actually not the GSA's responsibility to do that. They are not going to be doing the CEQA document on that new growth. They are not going to be issuing building permits. They're not going to be issuing any of that. They're going to be consulted. That's going to be the local agency. There are 7 different other options besides just paying for imported water that we came up with in the Greater Tehachapi Specific Plan that the county has implemented. So my only point here is framing the question. I think this is a question for your committee, but immediately going to what the GSA should charge, I'm just telling you, I'm just pointing out that right now, it's not the right question.
Okay, we got to where I wanted to go. We were actually in.
Okay, go ahead.
I love you because you and I talk past each other sometimes, and we're saying the same exact thing.
Keep going.
So, and you volunteered to perhaps frame that question for us and have it ready for us to go for our next meeting.
And then you can take what I frame and say, that's not quite right, and I want to talk about this, but I would like to provide that as the planning.
No, I appreciate it, and I was so glad to see you walk through the door tonight as I pondered how we were going to deal with this question, because you are she represents one of the 5 entities that does have the authority to address what we don't and what the GA does not have. And so you can frame the question in a way that we can provide a framework back to the GA to talk about this and deal with the policy issues that surrounded ourselves and be productive rather than spinning our wheels and causing angst in a topic that is very fraught with that.
And I want to be clear that I'm representing planning. I'm representing San Bernardino County, Inyo County. I'm representing the planning perspective, not representing, what is Kern County going to do? And so I, can bring ideas. But I'm going to shape these questions based on all the entities, including the Water District, providing for China Lake, providing for the expansion of, the, base mission. But I think that there's enough diversity here, and you know how to chew on items, that I want to bring some ideas of this or that. What do you think? And so I'd like to be of service in that way.
Everybody agree to that?
If I could just make
can you perhaps send it to us ahead of time?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
If I could make a request, I'm going to claim a mantle that I often wear, and that's one of ignorance. If you could do like a little 5-minute spiel on just how growth is currently managed and how like to give us a little more
Sure.
ammo before we make a decision.
Not tonight.
Yeah, real quick primer right now.
As part of this. Yeah.
Okay.
Another
So
key
with
element.
that, I would propose we've killed this issue for tonight.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're talking in the dark. Okay, then any public comment on that? Thank you. With that, let's go to the imported water update if available, and there's no update beyond what we had at the last GA that was given. Do we feel we need that? There's a meeting next week of the subcommittee with the consultant, and there will be a report out of that available.
Will it be available on the website before the board meeting?
I don't know how they're going to provide that. Don, can you comment on that?
Well, I was prepared to give a little report if.
Go ahead if you want.
I won't take much time.
Go ahead. No, it's good.
Again, Capital Corps is continuing to have meetings with potential water providers. They still have the intent to issue a technical memorandum on water supply and costs by July. As Dave said, there is the GA appointed ad hoc committee has a conference call set up for next Thursday. And on the agenda for that call are 3 items. The first being actionable water suppliers available for the Indian Wells Valley Basin, government affairs update and preparation for a late June trip to Washington, D.C. to meet with legislators there, and also a potential grant opportunity pertaining to water suppliers and interagency cooperation. Again, that call is scheduled for next Thursday. Also, before the next Groundwater Authority meeting, there is a meeting set up with representatives of Capital Corps and myself to meet with Los Angeles Department of Water and Power at their office in LA on the 19th. And primarily on the agenda is the potential water banking project in Indian Wells Valley. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. Any questions?
I just had a question. What was the second one you did that you said? You said water supply is the first, and the DC trip is the third thing, but I didn't catch the second.
The third thing?
It was the second one.
What
The
was your
second one is a government affairs update in preparation for a late June trip to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Did you get the third one?
Isn't that Washington, D.C. trip?
No. The third one was a grant opportunity pertaining to water supplies and interagency cooperation.
They've made some good progress.
Yes, they have.
Public comment? Okay, next item, future agenda items. I have the 4 listed there. If there's any attorney meetings or allocation status discussions, we'll update it. The draft chapters 2 and 3, they promised. We'll see. Progress on the management scenario modeling. If it comes out as we're requesting, they come to the PAC and the TAC for the next ones. Managed growth policy considerations led by Lorelei, and an imported water update at that time. Any other suggestions?
That's more than enough.
I know we're getting into the meat now. That the chapters 2 and 3 are going to have huge policy in them.
Can I make a request that you do managed growth first?
Did I what first?
That you move it up on the agenda?
Move what up on the agenda?
Growth.
Oh, for you. Yeah, I got you. If so, you can come and still make it home before daylight. Okay, will do. Any other suggestions? Public? Okay. Future PAC meeting dates. I mentioned, note, there is no July meeting because it would have been July 4th. So we are meeting 1 week after the GA. So we won't have an agenda. We'll probably finalize the agenda by Monday, especially if there are things that come out of closed session or directions into the TAC and what is going to come into the TAC and PAC. So be watching Friday and over the weekend. I'll try to get as much information out as we get before it. It'll probably won't be till the beginning of the week that we're going to get some of the information that's going to feed the meetings. It's 1 week turnaround on that, and then we're back to the regular schedule. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a meeting in mid-July having to be scheduled. depending on what comes out of those, the GA and the TAC meetings that day, because that's 5 or 6 weeks in between there. Then the regular times for August and September, because we have to have the complete draft of the GSP out 90 days before January 31st for public review. So our work, to one level of, to what level of fidelity the GSP will be, unless there's an extension, we'll see. But as we said, we thought we would be working more during the summer. Now it looks like more late summer. Okay? Last member comments. Lyle?
I don't have anything further.
I think we've said it all.
None.
I'm done.
Tim? None. Ed?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the ad hoc committee realizes I appreciate the time and effort they spent, and I think they did a lot of good preparing, but I'm just not ready to see it through yet with that not being clear on funding, and especially with some of the other issues coming up.
Yeah, they're just recommendations.
What?
They're just recommendations, and
Right, I understand.
they were open to some degree.
Okay.
But I understand. Renee?
No comment. I just want to thank all the members for all the work they do.
Thank you. I have a comment. The domestic well owner registration request postcard. Apparently, in cutting down your list, and I can understand exactly why you cut it down, but so far I know of at least 3 well owners who did not get it, and they're all sitting here.
They're on the table.
I understand that, but the concern, Don, is, okay, Lyle didn't get one, Wes didn't get one, we didn't get one. How many other well owners didn't get one?
I can't answer that, but we sent out, over 2,000, and I can't imagine why you didn't get them.
Well, I know why I didn't, but I don't know why they didn't.
I don't know. I mean, we can see if your address is on there, but I'm pretty sure they were. Did you get the original postcard?
Yes,
The one that
No.
about Sigma?
yes.
Okay, then
I'm getting the ones that the water district sends out to water district customers. Yes, I get those, but I didn't get one for
No,
me.
I was asking, did you get the first that was sent out by the Groundwater Authority on
Yes.
Sigma, just announcing the meetings and such?
I don't think so. I don't remember that one.
That went to every parcel owner. I don't know if it's a post
Yes.
office delivery issue or what. We had every address, every parcel in the basin, Inyo County, San Bernardino County, Kern County. 16,600 went
That's
out.
right. From the
Wow.
tax rolls, whatever address is on the tax rolls
Okay,
is what they mailed it to. So
Correct.
if you get a tax bill at your office, if it goes to a trust, then it went to the trust. It didn't go to your house.
that was the first time around, but you cut the list down this time.
We
correct?
removed water district customers, and we erred on the safe side. There are probably less
What-
than 1,000 wells, and we sent over.
Why don't you guys
2,000.
give your addresses, and Don, you can check and see where the snafu is. Do you know the addresses they were mailed to?
Oh, sure we do, yeah.
Why don't we just double check that? Otherwise, we're spinning around.
That was
We
just-
already know the post office has some troubles.
Yes, that was just a comment.
I think you guys did the best possible effort.
Okay, last comment.
I got one. Oh my gosh, I forgot. Everybody always says this, and now I'm a firm believer of. They always say, "Talk close to the mic," right? I tried to watch the May PAC meeting, and boy, I'll tell you what. If you don't get right up there, I wish this thing had a longer spout on it, so you could be closer to it. You just can't. You can't hear it. It's just quite amazing. So it's a big deal about talking into the mic if you want to look at the video. Because I
Agreed.
tried that. I hadn't done that before. And I go, oh wow, look at that.
Even the city councilmen have to be reminded of that all
Oh
the
yeah,
time.
I'm certain. Yeah, I'm certain.
Okay,
So, anyhow, that's it.
Last comment I have is I did want to thank very much the committee for taking this on. I know it's work, Judy and others. I think it was well done. I think it's, Lorelei said it was spot on, exactly the kinds of thing we need to be doing. We volunteered to do this. It's
Yes,
important
we
work.
did.
We fought for a year to get this. Let's roll up our sleeves and keep doing it. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I'm
one
sorry.
quick announcement.
I'm sorry, Don.
One quick announcement from a kids' table here. Monday night is the Water District's board meeting. Obviously, during the summer, Water District our customers use more water than during the winter. 2 of those uses are evaporative coolers and landscaping. At our board meeting Monday night, there will be presentations from Ferguson, HVAC, and Michael Certified Air on alternatives to evaporative coolers. So if you're interested in finding out information about that, I encourage you to attend the board meeting at 6 o'clock at our boardroom.
Thanks. And Lorelei? Yes. Any last comment?
No. Thank you for letting me help.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks all for everyone for coming. Good night.